Welcome to Mindshift. I'm Brandon, and today we are talking about the problems with paradise. Now, this is a bit different considering how much we've been talking about hell lately. In eating whatever food you like the best and all of these things, but that's not about the worship part, that we would endlessly, eternally be worshiping God. Now, maybe some of that are correlating worship incorrectly, and we thought of the praise and worship parts of in eating whatever food you like the best and all of these things, but that's not. They are about songs that are sang, instruments that are played. I'm going to skip the narcissistic parts of how ridiculous it is that this God who wants a relationship with us is having an end goal where the vast amount of all time, like if eternity is real, if infinity is a concept and you live 120 years, take it to the max here. That means that God's intention, his design for all time, is just to have his robotic slaves worshiping him. Why would he need this? Why would he want this? I'm serious. Like, if you really zoom out, it makes no sense, and it sounds absolutely awful. Talking more on the monotony front, I really believe that something that never ends, right? That we're going to run into a series of repeatable events forever. I really think a lot of people who haven't thought about deep time or haven't read mathematical books on the concept of infinity and things like this, which is a huge interest of mine. I absolutely fascinates me. They have a hard time conceptualizing, and I do too. I'm not like, oh, I read a few books, now I get it. Like, it's an impossible thing to conceptualize, but there are some visualizations and some kind of thought experiments that one can do to help get them further down the road. And the further down the road you go towards the concept of infinity, the more you realize there's no good version of it. There can't be. Nothing can go on forever and be a good thing. You'll live every possible occurrence of anything that can be done in heaven, a billion, trillion, quadrillion, Google times a billion times over forever, and it will be just the beginning, just the blink of an eye of how many more times you'll do it again. But that's just a little teaser to get us started. I've already realized that I've mixed kind of points 1 and 2 here, which is monotony and slavery. So let's just kind of combine this, point 1 and 2, and I'll continue to talk about it. Now, a lot of the excuses for this are, again, going back to, but you don't understand, we've never been in the very presence of God. We could spend an eternity worshiping him, and it would be amazing. Well, this then leads to that second point that we've already mixed in a little bit, which is slavery. Heaven sounds like eternal submission, right? Can I choose to leave? That would be question number 1. Can I opt out? Can I choose oblivion at some point? Maybe after 2 billion years, I'm just really done with this concept. Can I leave? No, I can't leave. Well, Brandon, it's not so much that you can't leave, it's that God wouldn't have you have the desire to leave. So God's controlling me. God's controlling my mind. God's controlling my will and my desires. He's forcing it. He's compelling it by his very presence. That's slavery. I don't care what positive spin you want to put on it because you've called God a good thing. I'll even, for all of this that we're talking about today, I'm going to entertain the idea that this God is actually somehow good, just, and moral, which is already so problematic, right? But I'm trying to really just think like, okay, you guys are all right. This God is real. Hell doesn't exist. There's oblivion and annihilation and universalism and all of these things. How is heaven going? And the very fact that I have no say in the matter, I have no say that that's the only alternative, right? Like with universalism, or that it's the, sure, maybe it is better than hell. I'll give you that. But the lesser of two evils doesn't make it beneficial or good. And God forcing it to be good, right? Like if I can't even choose to think how I want to feel about it, to have my own experience, if every single person who's ever lived, think about how different we all are. If we're all going to have exactly perfect, repeatable, and expected outcomes in heaven, to experience everything in the exact same way, what's the point? How on earth could we all agree on that without some coercion, some forced manipulation of our will and thought processes and feelings? Oh, we don't have will, thought processes, and feelings, so we are robots. We do have will, thought processes, and feelings. How? Show me how. How can I utilize them in heaven? If I can't think of alternate perspectives, if I can't come up with a better outcome, if there's just nothing different, if it can't end, like, do you guys understand really what this would seem like? And so many of you have justified the version of heaven as being so good because it's so much better than the alternative. But I'd encourage you to really think about, if hell didn't exist at all and someone just told you at the end of your life, here's what happens. You go, you get a new body, you don't feel pain anymore, you don't feel sorrow anymore, you're perfect, you're a perfect being, you can't grow, you can't get better at things, you can't develop a new skill or hobby, you can't improve, and your entire existence is simply to shout over and over, holy, holy is the name. Is that something you would willingly sign up for? And don't just say yes because you're still afraid of death or you're still afraid of hell and you're not sure what happens in the afterlife, so at least this one doesn't have any pain in it, right? Like, are you just choosing it because it is, again, the lesser of two evils? Or does this make any sense at all? And if you really, no consequences, had the option to just stop existing after a certain amount of time, wouldn't that be preferable? Wouldn't you like to at least reserve that as an option? I think if anyone is honest, then they would. And if you're so caught up in your feelings and your emotions and the glory and presence of God that you can't have those faculties, then you are no longer you anyways. You are indeed a slave robot. You can't have it both ways. You're somehow an individual in heaven. You still get to pursue your passions and hobbies. How? First of all, the Bible doesn't even tell us that we can do that. Second of all, if we can't be sad, then we can't ever have messed up, right? Like, if I want to get really good at wood carving and I mess up, what does that look like in heaven? What does a mistake look like in heaven? How can one learn? How can someone improve? Again, like, the concepts here, the philosophical ideology of what heaven's issues are endless. And let's just say I'm wrong about so many of these facets that I don't think I can be wrong about, and we do get to grow in heaven and we do actually excel, and there are layers to this. Well, that's going to lead to some unfairness problems, which I'm going to cover here in a few points. But before that, still, to what end? We're talking about eternity. I can only do so many hobbies. Like, do you understand? Everything that you can ever imagine is finite. We have a finite amount of things we can be interested in or do. We have a finite amount of times we can do them before we lose interest. We have a finite amount of growth that we can do in any particular subject. This simply doesn't work. Eternity is never going to be a good thing, no matter how you spin it. I don't want to live forever. I honestly do not believe there is any good version of heaven. If it's a choice and I get to talk to some creator at the end of all of this, I don't care who the creator is or what his plan or her plan or its plan is for an afterlife. I would honestly prefer at some point, maybe I want to check it out for 500 years, but at some point, I want the option to not exist, to not be conscious, to not participate. I could talk about these first 2 points forever, but let's move on. This leads us to point 3, which is the free will issue. This is probably, honestly, one of the top 2 issues with heaven. Okay, so once again, we can't cry, we can't suffer, we can't feel pain, we can't die, etc. All of these things, again, straight from Revelation. So, are we good in heaven? Yeah, we're the epitome of good. We're as moral gets. Okay, so I can't suffer and I am good. I'm good all the time. Everything I do and say is good because it has to be, because otherwise it might bring suffering to me or to other people. It could bring sadness. It could bring sin. There's no sin in heaven. If there's no sin in heaven, then there's 100% only good moral things according to God. That right there 100% means there's no free will in heaven, because that is the entire defense for why we must have free will on earth. Now, I'm not the first to make this point, but maybe you haven't heard it, or maybe you've excused it, and I'm going to really ask you to consider this point if you claim to be a believer. Why does God let bad things happen? Well, you don't understand. It's not really God doing it or letting it happen here on earth, Brandon. He had to allow free will. We have to understand pain to understand pleasure. We have to be able to reject him so that he doesn't force us. God wouldn't want us just to be robots, okay? And that's the excuse for all of the atrocities on this earth. And if you really are too historically ignorant or too in your bubble to understand the realities of the horror of this world and of the history of this world, to think that that is somehow a justifiable excuse, I feel sorry for you. An all-powerful God could and should do better. But that's not what this is about. This is about heaven. So there is a concept of us being able to be perfectly moral and still experiencing joy and worshiping God and having connection with him, having communion with him, and all of the things that God wants from us without sinning without suffering, and it's actually the plan for the majority of our existence ever when you consider eternity. So why have these 100 years of suffering, pain, and death for everyone? It makes no sense. You cannot have your cake and eat it too on this one. To be very clear, if there is sin in heaven, it's not heaven. It's not perfect. If there can't be sin in heaven, that means something is controlled, either our desire or our will, our ability. A lot of people will say, Brandon, again, you don't understand. In the presence of God, you won't want to sin. That is such a cop-out. Then why doesn't God share his presence with us here on earth? Well, because it would rob you of your free will. So his presence does rob us of free will. This is just beyond simple to me. Earth is 100% unnecessary because we are always going to end up in heaven with a God that is controlling us, where he does not allow for the bad things and yet still somehow provides the pleasurable things. So if it is a good thing that can exist without all of the bad things, make this make sense to me. This is honestly one of my biggest problems, not just with the concept of heaven, but with all of the belief system in God in general, mainly because it ties to my connection with the problem of evil or the problem of suffering, and the indefensible excuse of free will completely falls on its face when you consider the realities and the setup of heaven according to the Bible. We could talk about this topic for 3 hours, for 10 hours, for 2 weeks. Like, this is endless to me. This is of so much interest. There are so many little caveats and so many things to iron out, but I think I've given you the general idea of it, and feel free to argue any remaining points you have, because I've looked into them. I'm very interested in this, and I have found it absolutely inexcusable. Point 4, and I'm worried I might end up redundant here, but I'm going to try to hit on the idea of perfection and of stagnation. So despite the point that we just went through, I really actually understand to a degree the concept that one cannot appreciate the good things in life without some understanding of the bad things in life. The problem is there's so much bad and suffering in this world that the good does not outweigh it, and I don't think it's as easy as a one-to-one compensation or even a heaven-to-earth compensation, right? Should 4 children have to starve to death in the next few minutes for me to appreciate the next meal that I'm going to get? Is that the idea? Is that the trade-off that has to happen? How many young women need to be raped for other women to appreciate being in a relationship? Just inexcusable and immoral ideas to me that we had to have this level of suffering. God did control this. God did set up the arrangement. He is at some point holding the puppet strings, and he has made certain barriers within when he will intervene, when he won't, what the initial setup is, how capable we are as individuals of doing things to other individuals, etc. Like, there are limits that he has put on our earthly existence. And within those limits, he is still allowed for this amount of suffering versus this amount of pleasure. In the heaven factor. But there are some things. Let's go back to my example of taking up a hobby. What makes a hobby enjoyable? Well, we actually have a lot of research on this from a neuroscience standpoint, where we understand that really it's the process of achieving a goal that is so desirable, that is so enjoyable. It's not reaching that, right? I'm someone who for a number of years was very heavy into endurance sports, and it is always fun to cross the finish line on your first ultra marathon. That was a big goal I had, and I've done a lot of them now, and I've done longer distances, and each time it's exciting and there's a huge sense of accomplishment, but it's immediately over. And what I realized I was enjoying the whole time was the achievement of getting better, right? Setting a new PR in training, upping my weekly mileage, learning how to deal with that injury better, going for that run when it was really cold and snowy or really rainy or 105 degrees and humid, seeing myself grow in self-discipline, seeing myself push through and become more mentally tough and stable. These were the true treasures, but they were only treasures because there were days when I quit. I didn't go on the run in the rain because I couldn't run as fast, because I couldn't make it all the way up that hill without stopping. Those are the pains that make the pleasures worth it. So again, I understand that to a certain extent. I don't understand it to the extent that we're excusing all the horrors of this world. But in heaven, to get back to my point here, there can't be any of that. So yes, on one hand, inexcusable with the free will concept and being robots in heaven, but on the other hand, we should need small amounts of things not working out or going wrong to be able to enjoy anything. I just imagine heaven being a place of pure stagnation. Think about how gross water becomes when it sits versus when it flows in the river. You've probably heard the old adage, if you're not growing, you're dying, kind of a thing. What is it like to be the exact same level of anything forever. It terrifies me. That sounds like true torture. I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, heaven is so bad that hell all of a sudden seems better. No, hell is the worst of all worst possible things, but heaven is still awful. What does it mean to be perfect in a perfect state with a perfect body forever? It means nothing. It means absolutely nothing for Christians that are so hung up on meaning, right? Where do we get our meaning in life? The only answer you can muster is God, and then you get him forever. And then what does it mean? What does it mean? It means nothing. I'm blown away that there are not more people constantly deconverting because of the very concept of heaven, never mind hell. But let's move on to a related topic here, which is identity and memory or consistency. I think that this is something really interesting to consider. We are told that in some sense, again, I don't care if you want to argue for a spiritual body, our physical body, or just a soul or spirit kind of floating up there, which I think that one is the most problematic one. So for this, let's imagine we're in some kind of a bodily form. We are told that we will be able to recognize other people. That's why people love the concept of heaven. When they lose a child and they've convinced themselves this child has gone to heaven, they now want to live their life in a way that makes sure they go to heaven so they can be reunited with that child. Well, what does that mean, right? What is that going to look like? Here's a question. Will you still have your memories from this time on earth in heaven? I doubt it, and here's why. Once again, that verse in Revelation provides us with so much ammunition. There are no tears, death, sorrow, or sin. How much sorrow do you have when you think about your life? You might have the best life ever. You might have every single thing that provides you with meaning and purpose and beauty in your life. And I bet when you think through your memories, you are filled with sorrow. And then again, whatever age you are as you're listening to this, imagine being at the end of your life, right? Whenever that life ends, you don't think you'll have ever had any regrets. You don't think you'll ever have anyone that you miss. What about the people who don't know God and they're in hell or oblivion or whatever? They're not with you. If you have a memory of them, if you have a concept of who you were and what you did on this earth and the people you hurt and the people that you hurt that can't be in heaven because they didn't think or were convinced of the right thing, how do you think that's going to go? You simply cannot be able to have these memories, this same conscious continuum. So what is your identity in heaven? How are you recognizing people? How are you holding on to your past? Because to hold on to your past at all, to be the same person, like this is a really fun kind of ship of Theseus kind of philosophical thought experiment here. To what degree are you still you if God has to rob you of some part of yourself, some part of your desire, some part of your will, some part of your nature, some part of your memory, some part of your previous existence, right? To really be able to ensure no tears, death, sorrow, or sin, you are being manipulated into some newer creation. And to what extent can you have that done until you are no longer yourself? I believe it would happen almost immediately. It would break down. You would almost immediately have to be considered something entirely new. And for God to work all these things out, I think he's going to have to rob you of entirely who you were. If you're a mother and a wife right now on earth, and your husband, like me, deconverts, and one of your children follows his example and never believes, and your other child does believe, when you die, somehow you have one child that believed correctly with you in heaven, but not your husband and not your other child. How is this going to go for you? Are you going to look at that one child in heaven, somehow recognizing them, somehow experiencing them, somehow appreciating them without being able to think about your other child and your husband? Can you separate that out? Does God have to rob you of those memories? One of the sickest answers I've heard is that when we are in heaven and we are so filled with the presence of God, we will delight even in our loved ones burning in hell, because the justice of God is so beautiful and we will understand it so clearly when we are in his power and glory. Not only is this a complete assertion that there is no backing for whatsoever, but it is one of the most grotesque ideas in the world that God, who supposedly gives us family, instills in us the need to care, tend, and love to them, to develop with them, to communicate with them, to grow with them on this time in earth, would have us just fine, have that wife just fine with one of her children up in heaven looking down like we see happens in the Bible and being glad that her sweet little child, whose only sin was listening to its father, and not being convinced of all of the dumb assertions that are supposed to be spiritual truths, burning and being tortured for eternity. If there is a God that would construct that kind of a setup, that's disgusting. If there is a God who would negate all that and just erase the memory, that is disgusting. You have been robbed of your identity. You have been robbed again of your free will. You are a slave. You are a worship slave. The Egyptians had slaves of the Israelites to work. Fine. It's nothing compared to wiping away your entire identity, forcing you to the floor, and spending eons and infinity doing nothing other than proclaiming the greatness of this God who did all those things. This is abhorrent. But I digress. Two last problems here. Let's talk about fairness in heaven, right? So I'm going to, again, major in the majors here, and let's just say that belief is what gets you there. Let's look at John's gospel. Believe and be saved. I tell you these things so you can know and be assured, right? Believe and be saved. You made it. You're there. You're in heaven. However, there are layers to heaven. There are different mansions. There are different levels of crowns that we can earn for ourselves based off our moral acts here on earth. And this, again, is we have to put aside that some people think it is our works that will get us to heaven. Let's just assume, however it happens, the people that make it to heaven make it to heaven. Think about the layers of unfairness that are going to exist in heaven. What is the point of a physical reward in heaven if you can't feel better about it than what someone else has? Like, think about this for a second. If there's no suffering in heaven, there's no sadness in heaven, then the person here who did not achieve this, they don't know what they're missing. They can't comprehend that. And the person who has this has reason to enjoy it more than the person down here. That you would be willing to give up these decades, most beautiful thing that can happen. Now, not everyone has a beautiful life, but for those of us that are lucky enough to live in a certain kind of first world country or have access to healthcare and a home and consistent food and shelter, then on top of that, be able to enjoy things like friends or family, to have individual interests and hobbies and passions. Just you're going to chuck it away because someone instilled enough fear in you that if you didn't surrender this life, you would not inherit the next. This is the greatest robbery of all time. Your life has been stolen out from under you, and you are willfully giving it away, thinking that you are the one that's coming out on top. This is the worst trade you can ever imagine. I am honestly so sad. I see these Christians with good intentions, worshiping, spending their time doing the things they think they need to do, denying themselves often, giving up their cross, the ones that are being consistent, and they're missing out. They're losing. They lose relationships because they hold too tightly. How many Christians have you heard whose parents won't speak to them anymore because they deconverted? Whose friend groups got destroyed because someone didn't believe like them anymore? People are putting a hierarchy of value on God and the afterlife, which is really selfishly here. What they're actually putting as a hierarchy is their future potential pleasure. It is more important for me to go to heaven than it is for me to treat my family well. Even Jesus says as much, right? When he thinks the end is actually coming, what does he tell everyone to do? It doesn't matter anymore, guys. Don't store up treasures here. Don't save for retirement. Don't care about your family. There's only one thing that matters now. The kingdom of heaven is coming. This false promise for 2,000 years, and of course with all the other religions and every other ideology beforehand, has kept people from living their best life. And then don't even get me started on the decisions that we're making or not making correctly because of this. The people, the world, the resources we're not taking care of because we simply think it doesn't matter. It's all going to end anyways. No, it's all going to end. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy because we aren't doing anything with our stewardship over this planet. And how could we? How could we make good decisions when we think that inexistence is right around the corner? This makes us bad at decisions. This makes us bad at connection and family and love. This makes us bad at valuing things. This makes us bad at accepting things. This makes us bad at everything. The problem of paradise is that it is not real and it is a true thief, a murderer of anything potentially good in this lifetime. I am quite passionate about this topic, and I believe for good reason. People are just losing their lives, the only lives they're ever going to have, and off such little, if not no evidence, and such bad assertions, such easily falsifiable allegations of who this God is, how he exists, what he wants from us, and what we should be doing with our lives. It's nonsense. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. Let me know any other problems you have with heaven. Let me know any arguments you had against mine. I think that this is a very undervalued topic in this space. So do me a favor and share this one. Watch it again. Watch it all the way through. Give it a like. Give it a nice comment. I think that this is a really important concept for people to be considering. I'm not the only person with these thoughts. I'm not the first person with any of these thoughts. Nothing I'm going to say is ever going to be new or novel. I just hope that I can bring some things to the forefront that might not be there for some individuals some of the time, so we can make some amount of difference. That's all. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful day. And until next time, keep thinking.